This is the basic controller we're going to build today. I can move left and right and up and down and all that fun stuff, and the background scrolls behind me. I can also shoot my weapon. It's a very simple setup for now. We're going to cover all of the details of this game in this future series. It starts with this player prefab, and you can see it's just one of the ships from an asset I downloaded on the asset store. But what I added to the prefab is these gun barrels, gun 1 and gun 2. I just added them onto the prefab to store their location, and so you can see they've got a flow graph each attached to them, which sets the position of the scene variable for gun barrel 1 and gun barrel 2. It's very simple. On the update, it just sets that position and stores that in a scene variable for gun barrel 1, gun barrel 2. It's a vector 2, 2D game, vector 2. Very simple. The other parts of this came with the downloaded prefab, ship 1 flames, ship 1 lines. I had a plan for the lines where if you picked up a new weapon, the lines would change color. It never happened due to the time constraints. And I added this impact. This is a visual effect I downloaded from the asset store, very simple, it's particle system. It just is the blow up effect that happens when a player dies. That's the player prefab, but the important thing to remember is that gun barrel 1 and gun barrel 2 position is called gun 1 and gun 2, or gun 1 barrel, gun 2 barrel. That's how I got that effect to switch what side of the ship that the bullet is shooting from. Once those barrels are set, we can add flow machines to the player prefab. The player prefab looks like this. This is how we fire the weapon. We'll go ahead and cover that first since we just covered the gun barrels. I did this with a keyboard input event for when the space bar is pressed or when the space bar is moved to the down position. Kind of a rookie way to do it for me. What I should have done was assign a custom event or a custom key and given that key a variable so the player could change that key. But again, if you do it this way, it's going to be just fine. You just can't change it from the space bar to anything else. Then what's going to happen is a one shot is fired for that laser sound effect that you heard, that basically the pew pew. Off the sound effect, we come into a branch, and the branch is going to grab a graph variable called which gun. And which gun is set to false for now. And when we shoot, it's going to say, okay, if which gun is false, then we're going to set the variable for which gun to true. Off that branch, both the true and the false do the same function with only 2 variables changed. So off each of them, we're going to set which gun. If which gun is false, we're going to set which gun to true. If which gun is true, we're going to set it to false. Real simple. So just the next time you press the spacebar, it does the opposite gun barrel. That's all it does. We're going to get the scene variable for gun variable 1 and gun variable 2. Again, those are vector 2 positions. We plug that into the instantiate the basic weapon, and then we use the quaternion. The quaternion doesn't really matter in this case because it's a 2D game, so it's not going to rotate, and it's a circle. So what I should have done differently here is off the setting of the which gun option or the which gun triggers, I should have ran a custom event, and that event handled the firing of the weapon, so that way I could change the weapon. So the way this is set up, it's only going to ever fire one weapon, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. But if you want to fire more weapons, you would want to have off the setting of the which gun variable, you would change that to a custom event that finds which gun is active and handles all that process. But for now, this is what it is. That's how we handle the shooting of the weapon. Now on to the movement. What we did was on the update, we're going to get the axis of the vertical input that the player is putting in, and we're going to multiply that by the speed, which is a graph variable. Kind of knew when I made this game, I should have made this an object variable so I could reference it properly later. That's fine, it's a graph variable and that's not a big deal. We multiply that by the speed, so the longer you hold the button, the faster the ship gets. It doesn't react right away. If you don't have a speed mechanic in there, it ends up going real quick. You could do that too for the right game. And then what we want to do is I made another graph variable called player vertical, which is set to 0 because that's the position of the player in the screen space, basically. I'm going to set a clamp on that after the addition to -5.2 and 5.2. Those are just the relative positions on the map that the player can travel to without going off the screen. That's all that does. And then we're going to come off that and set the player vertical to whatever that math ends up being. That's what controls how the player moves through the world. And then off the set vert, we're going to set the horizontal. Prior to setting the horizontal, we're going to run through the same math. So we're going to get the input axis for horizontal, multiply it by the speed. We're going to add that to the player horizontal, and we're going to clamp that at -10 and 7, which is the left and right, the horizontal indicators. Now, the player horizontal also starts at -10 if you look over on the graph view for the variables. And that's because that's just the starting position of the player in this scene and in every subsequent scene. The game game is this simple. It doesn't change ever. Remember, the player doesn't move through the level in this game. The background scrolls behind the player, which we're going to cover next. And then off the setting of the player horizontal, we are going to set the position of the player prefab to a new vector 2, which is equal to the player vert and the player horizontal. Very, very simple movement, but there's a lot we can do with this. I could have animated the ship to give it a little tilt when it goes up and down, and I could have animated the flames out the back if I had more time. But again, I'm just going to leave it like it is because I'm kind of happy with the game and how it turned out in that 48-hour period. I do want to cover this little flow graph though before we move on to the background, because it just sets the isDead variable to false, meaning I'm alive, and sets the time scale to 1. So that way it's like a fail safe. If I have the time scale set to 0 from finishing a prior level or dying, it just resets it back to 1. And also remembers to set the isDead to false. It's very, very simple. And the other thing I did is on the main camera for the game. So there is a background. If I zoom out, we can see. Yeah, you can see the background covers up the entire visible area of the game, or what the camera is showing. And attached to that camera is a flow machine. The flow machine of the main camera controls the setting of the end of the level. It gives me a timer to end the level and controls when the scrolling stops, i.e. when the player finishes the level, and it sets the scrolling speed of the background. We want to set the level ended to false, meaning that the level has not yet ended. This comes up later. So again, another failsafe. We're just going to say, hey, this level has not yet ended. So the level timer is set to 0, and we're going to get time.delta time. We're going to add it to the level timer, and then we're going to set the level timer every frame. Basically, we're just going to add how much we're adding delta time. We could have added game time either way. I don't think it really matters. And then we're going to say if A is less than B, in other words, if level timer is less than 30, well, then we're going to keep going. We're going to scroll. Okay, that's a custom argument. If it's false, we're going to set level end to true. Okay, and that when level end is true, we're going to do some other things. And then this flow machine controls the scrolling. So it's a custom event to scroll the background. Technically, this is called every frame because the event we just looked at runs on the update, and we'll call the scrolling function. So it's going to set the variable for X scroll, which is a graph variable, not a scene variable. X scroll is currently set to 0. We're going to get the time. This is time.time, so not delta time. And we're going to multiply it by the scroll speed, which is 0.1. And then we're going to set the graph scroll position variable to that math. We're going to give it a new vector 2 with an X of the new variable and a Y of 0. And we're also going to give it an offset. So that way it loops itself and it doesn't scroll off the background. So that's what that offset is for. Otherwise it will just fly off, not wrap itself. And then we come off that offset into a set texture offset, again to help the looping mechanism. The object variable we need to plug in there is the background, and the name of this one is main text or main texture. We have a background object, which is the prefab that the camera controls this stuff. Okay, so this is important also to cover. Otherwise, we can't control this. So here's the background. Let me open this up in full screen and show everybody. So on the update of the background, we are constantly checking whether or not isDead is true. If it's true, we are going to activate the game over object, which is a UI element. We'll cover that in a later video. And if the level is 1, this picks up that level end scene variable from the camera that we just looked at and says, okay, if that's true, we are going to have a 4.5 second delay. We're going to show level 1. We're going to show the level 1 game object, again, which is just end screen display. After 3 seconds, we're going to set level ended to false. We're going to load the next scene by getting it from the build index, and we're going to add 1 to it. So all the scenes are added to a build index in the game. We're just going to add 1 to that and then load that scene. I believe it says loading next level. This basically handles everything moving through the level. And that's the basic controller setup. In the next video in the playlist, we'll be covering more about this game, but you can also check out this video here to see how I did other controllers for my other games.